Okay, thank you. Okay, so last time yesterday we talked about scientific thinking, then we talked previously about logic. Today we will talk about the rational thinking as being a method or a method of thinking. So let me create this new slide here. So the rational thinking, it's one of the methods of thinking. And this is the most straightforward way of thinking. It relies on the four components, which are the subject of thinking, or I would call the material object. Sometimes I hesitate to say it's material object because sometimes you have non-material object, like if you want to talk about instincts, you want to make a thought about instinct, that's not material, it is an object, it's not material, it's you can the sensing here has to do with feeling soul. So I will just, for completeness, I'll say non-material objects. And you definitely need the sensing. So it's very, and also since I mentioned the non-material objects, I will do the sensing or feeling, because feelings are really, in reality, it's a sense. And I will explain that in a bit. And I need the previous information. And then I need the ability to correlate the previous information to the subject. Okay, so that's the, in other words, if I have these four components, and then I do the following, these are the components. Now the method has to, must transfer the subject to the brain, which is you're using the brain, that's good enough for now. So I must be able to transfer the object to the brain, and this transfer can be through direct or indirect sensing. Direct means using your own senses. Indirect can be using instruments, like the ability to catch a sound using your cell phone, to be able to catch the electromagnetic waves, which are okay, so it could be through direct or indirect sensing. I have to be able to transfer the object, and then I have to find the relevant previous information. Now, when I say previous information, I have to be careful here, because the word previous information, sometimes you may think that, oh, I have to rely on what I have currently in my brain. The previous information, actually, you can obtain a new information from new sources. But this, once this new information is obtained and it's already, you got it in your brain, then it becomes previous immediately. So as soon as it comes to the brain, then you will call it previous information. So the word previous does not necessarily mean the information I got in my brain yesterday or 2 days ago or a year ago. but it is any information I will use to be able to correlate to the subject of thinking. So now I have to transfer the subject to the brain. I have to use direct or indirect sensing. So which means I know what is the subject. That's the idea. I have to know what is the subject. I see a hand raised there. Brother Ajaz, do you need to ask question before I proceed? Or you just raise the hand accidentally? Anyway.
Got raised by accident. By accident.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. I was trying. My brain correlated my previous information and made a quick judgment that it could be an accident or by accident. Anyway, so the previous information here, we mean an information available at the moment or at the time of making the judgment. So this is, I find the relevant previous information, and this is important, the word relevant and the previous, and find, all of this find, it's a process. Relevant, it's a criteria, because you may have tons of information in your brain. You may have tons of information, like when you search something on Google, you may get 10 or 15,000 results. This is a huge amount of information related to the topic or to the subject you are thinking about. So which information you need to use, which is relevant, which is irrelevant, find it. Okay, so this is the, and then the last thing is use the brain's property, which is the property of correlating information to subjects. What we call it, brain's property of linking. I use the word link, or correlating info to subject. Okay, and then you pass a thought. Okay, so that's the process. Let me put it in diagrammic format. So this is my subject. Could be, let's say, a certain, for example, let's say tree. So I got a tree, and here is my brain. So I transfer this through my sight, which means I was able to see the tree. And the question, which is the subject here, or the what type of a tree is this? Okay, so now, so my brain starts, I would say here, retrieve information. So that's what my brain will do. I will retrieve the information, and or let's say I will call it the info here. And with this info, I will ask the question. I will say first, I need retrieve and find relevancy. Okay, since the question I am posed with This is the question. I need to know what type of tree is this. I just saw a tree. So now I need, in the process of thought, I need retrieve the info and find the relevancy to the subject here. And in this case, I will be looking at information I already have. Do I have, let's say, the height of the tree, the color of the leaves, if it has a smell or not, what type of leaves it has. And then I start looking at information in my brain that I have collected, that I have read more maybe in books or somebody told me about, until I find the most relevant information. Then I will say, oh, my judgment would be, could be, for example, based on the information that I got, this is palm tree. Okay, so through the information I have, I was able to correlate this, and then I would say this is palm tree, based on whatever information I had earlier. This is just to find out what is this, although this is a question. Now it could be the issue here that may arise with the rational thinking. Let me address the first question, the correctness, or it's called validity of the thought, of the generated thought. What does it depend on? The correctness or validity depends on many factors. Number one, let me put it in numbers here. The first, did the subject reach the brain correctly? Meaning, did you really see it? From what angle? Assuming that I'm talking about seeing something. From which angle? Any other relevant means of transfer? For example, touching the surface, or maybe the feeling the heat or temperature, if you will. So the object in front of me, how do I transfer it to my brain? Does it have, let's say, hot or cold? Which angle I looked at it? Did I inspect all sides of the object? Just give me one second. عليكم السلام. استنى شوي بعدين على الموضوع. استنى. محمد، هو الولد الصغير طالب الباب الثاني. Okay. Sorry about that. So this is first, the correctness of your thought depends, number one, or first thing, on the sensing. So did the subject reach the brain correctly through direct/indirect sensing? One typical example which we every year we face is the moon sighting. You need to make a judgment or pass a thought. Is tomorrow the first day of Ramadan or the last day of Sha'ban? And all that, it depends. The idea is there a moon? Is there a crescent in the sky, the first crescent of the month? Is it there? And is it visible? Could anybody see it? And then once that object has been brought through, let's say, telescopes or through the bare eye, then what is it? Does it look like a moon? I know what a moon is. I know what a crescent is. We know all the features of it. So that's first thing, is the ability to sense the object. So if someone has better capabilities of seeing the object, then you will have better ability to pass a thought. Again, give me. Okay, so the first thing is the senses. Our senses, they do vary. Some people see things better. Some people examine the object or the subject in a better way. Sometimes you have access to some other views, if you will, like the sound. Maybe the object can make some sounds. There are feelings, touching, and so on. If it has to do with food, you may have taste or smell. All of this is have to impact the the thought also. Now the information, do you have sufficient information to related to the subject? And then from this information, how accurate is the information? And sometimes you may have some conflicting information. Are there conflicting pieces of information? Okay, like one, if I go to the example of the moon sighting, one piece of information, it tells you that the moon could not be born at this time. Another piece of information is that the moon must have been born but cannot be sighted because it's still too young. Or maybe a third piece of information that says the sky is too hazy, so the visibility of the moon is very slim. So if you have seen, or somebody had seen an object, then it must be something else. So there are conflicting information, accuracy of information. Maybe you have some the wrong data, or not accurate, or not proven correct. And then also sometimes the timing of the thought, because let's say if you are required to pass a thought in a very short period of time, and then with this timing of the thought, then there's how quickly you can find the relevant information. And this is sometimes a thought passed after the due date is not a thought. So it's or that's some of the criteria of making comparisons between different thinking processes. But this is still, all this is still rational thinking. And because the rational thinking relies very much on how good or bad you sense the object, how good or bad your information is, and how much information you have, or how many, if the information is too, how quickly you can find the relevant information, especially when the amount of information you have is very large. Because sometimes, let's say, if I want to pass a political judgment or political thought on the issues that are happening in Afghanistan today, if I happen to have so much information, I have information about first time Taliban when they came to rule back in 1996, and then how they were thrown out of power in 2001. And if I know the information about the help of Pakistani ISI to Taliban back in the end of the 90s, if I have information on what's going on in Qatar in the last few years, if I have information on some of the people who are running the show. So if all of that information is available to me, then I might not be able to pass the judgment, or it will take me too much time to do that, or I will arrive at conflicting I could arrive at conflicting opinions. So those are the things which need to be known, which leads us to, again, some yes.
In your previous slides, I have a question.
Yes.
So when we're talking about the subject and how do we perceive it, whether directly or indirectly, in case of history, how are we judging this? I mean, it's neither direct or indirect, so, or maybe it's indirect.
Yeah.
So could you just elaborate on the history? How?
Sure. Yeah, it's this is part of the indirect. So the here, let me go back instead of main issues. No, I will keep it. Do a slide here. Or I will do it with the indirect sensing. Can be one way is, as mentioned, instruments, or sensed by others, by some other entities, other individuals or people. And the people who sense the object or the subject described what they have sensed. So, for example, somebody, whether it's historical now or current, but it's not me, let's say a journalist reports that an explosion occurred, let's say today in Lebanon, which it's true today, and he describes the explosion in terms of sound, blast sound, smoke coming out of it, thickness, color of the smoke, thickness, etc. Or this could be already maybe someone reports the description of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Okay, so all of this is called indirect sensing. And here, the going back to the issues here involved will be how trustworthy is the report. Okay, for example, the report of an ayah or a hadith. So if someone is reporting that the Prophet ﷺ had said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. This is, I'm still not passing a judgment or thinking, what does this mean or what does it imply? I just want to know this expression came out of the mouth of the Prophet or not. So how trustworthy is the report? What do you need to accept or reject the report? What is the degree of acceptance? That's where we got the issue of mutawatir for hadith. We'll say if the narration is by multiple people, multiple chains of narrations, in each chain there are multiple narrators, then this is called, we call it mutawatir. And I already passed a judgment. It's a previous information. Now, my previous information is that something that's narrated in multiple chains, I judge. My thought is that this this report is certain, with certainty. Okay, if it's below tawatur, then I say it's dhann, it's best judgment. But still, I'm talking about the sound itself. Had the sound come from the mouth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with these words, "Innama al-a'malu bin-niyat," because if I was there and I listened to it and I heard it, so it becomes, this is the subject I am thinking about. I'm thinking about the meanings now of these words. If I listen to them myself. Now, if I did not listen, somebody listened and narrated to me, I have to use other thoughts to pass a judgment on the validity of the report. Like in the example of a journalist, if this journalist, I know it's coming from, let's say, Fox News, and the talk is about something happening in the Democratic Party, then it is something I suspect. There is suspicion. I need another report coming from a different source, let's say from CNN, to see what is it they are reporting. Let's say if I want to pass a judgment on a statement made by Biden today, let's say on the issue of Afghanistan. If this statement, which is being reported to me, is part of a speech that Fox News reported, I would say, my previous information tells me that reports by Fox News on President Biden is either incomplete or partially correct, or it's not the complete picture. So I need to listen to the whole speech. So I take the text, which is the text which I need to think about. It's not the text that was narrated by the journalist. So that's where the indirect sensing, the issues with indirect sensing comes from the you need your previous information. You need a previous information to pass a judgment on the correctness or validity before you start thinking about the subject itself.
Just quick, I mean, up here you mentioned for the ahadith, and there's a lot of work that has been done which kind of establishes the mutawatir and ahadith and all. And similarly with the journalists, I mean, as you mentioned with Fox News and the journalists, we can get a little bit grasp. But for instance, if we're talking about history, let's assume sometimes the genocide that happened in Armenia and Turkish, or when they talk about in Europe, that the Khilafah that did a lot of massacre. And so how do you validate history in that sense? I mean, there you'll find people on both ends, or you'll find books. I mean, you cannot validate the author that has been written maybe a couple of decades ago. So how does rational thinking come into that in those kind of scenarios?
Okay, let me add another slide here, which I will touch on thinking about historical incidents. Actually, this will be one of the themes that we'll be discussing, and I can give a quick glance in our future. The types or forms are actually called forms of thinking. One of it will be about history. One will be about literature, whether it's current or previous, let's say what Shakespeare had said or had not said, or his style. One of it is about political. One is about fiqh. One is about art, thinking. One, of course, the major one, which I will be talking about next, Aqidah. I think there are 4 more. There are 10 forms. I forgot them now. I had them enumerated in my outline, but one of them is about history. But quickly, immediately, there are thoughts that are established about thinking about history. One of it is the history is written or narrated in a biased form. So some people who narrate history based on their liking of the era or dislike. So I already know there is a bias. Now, filtering valid narrations or invalid narrations in history, it's very, 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 very difficult, because the history has not been narrated in the manner that hadith was narrated. Actually, there is here also the thinking about the hadith itself. And well, the fiqh I mentioned already, fiqh or the derivation of rules. So the history is going to be one of the very serious topics, because the conclusion that we have is that history cannot be a source of legislation, because legislation needs to be authentic. History is not authentic. Now, if history is narrated as events, not incidents, like, for example, there was a Roman Empire or a Persian Empire, but what the Romans have done or have not done, that is, especially in terms of text, is different to talk about. What the Romans have left behind, like some of the amphitheaters that the Romans have left in Greece or in Italy or in Jordan or Egypt or other places, those things can be subject for thought because you still see them and feel them and investigate them. But the thinking about history is very difficult, validating. So if I will go back to the issue of validation, how accurate is the information that we're talking about here? No, here. Okay. Yeah, so it's here. How trustworthy is the report? What do you need to accept the reject? Which is the validation process. So the validation process itself, and that's where becomes the rational thinking is very involved, because the validation process is a rational thinking on its own. So you need to pass a judgment or a thought. What is a validation process? How can I validate historical reports? And when the Muslims, they wanted to validate the hadith, they invented a new knowledge, if you will, and a new knowledge format, which is called the ilm al-rijal, the science or the knowledge of men or of people, in order to validate or invalidate the hadiths. So when we talk about history as one of the forms of thinking we have, we will arrive at some conclusions, provide some thoughts and examples, and eventually we came to the conclusions that history is either narrated from the perspective of someone who is satisfied with the events or someone who is dissatisfied with the events. So there is a big bias in history. So history will not be taken as a source of legislation or as a source of concrete concepts about life. That's why today when people tell us, well, see, during the era of Harun Rashid, there were lots of womanizing and drinking, and it was done in the vicinity of the palace of Harun Rashid. So are you going to bring us a khilafah like that? Well, number one, I'm not going to argue whether that statement is valid or invalid about the Harun Rashid era and what was done in his presence, because that cannot be validated. Number one. Number two, that piece of information is not going to be needed in my structure, in the way I'm going to structure my next state or my khilafah. So it's irrelevant. So many issues of the history become irrelevant for passing judgments on how you want to proceed in this life. And that makes also the other attribute of rational thinking. Here I will, where was, okay, some of the main issues which I was talking here is the number one, the accuracy of rational thoughts. Now, although the word rational sounds positive word, this is rational, but rational is the method to produce a thought. The accuracy of rational thoughts, as we already said, it depends on how accurate the reporting to the brain of the subject matter, actually, and how accurate is the information used to generate a thought, and also how thorough is the information. The information can be absolutely correct, but maybe not thorough. You have missed a piece of information. In fact, this becomes very important in the fiqh issue. You used a hadith which is absolutely correct or could be mutawatir, but that's not the only hadith that exists related to the subject. There are other hadiths, and maybe the other hadiths they provide a specialization of the mutawatir, accurate, absolutely accurate hadith. So you cannot pass, or your judgment will be invalid or inaccurate, or will be lacking if you are not using the thorough information. So it's the accuracy, the thoroughness of the information, completeness of the information, and of course, this has to do with the subjects, with the subject matter and the information. And there is one more thing. One more thing is the biased or bias. Bias in the process of correlation. Now, this bias is actually, it's part of the process. The brain, when the brain starts correlating the information, if you have bias, and we talked about that yesterday about the previous opinion, if the previous opinion you already have, or there are previous opinions, not necessarily on the subject, let's say a previous opinion that I will not accept a ruler for the Khilafah outside the Arabs. Let's say the Khalifa must be an Arab or must be from Quraysh. That's an opinion I already have, and it is, and probably this opinion is strengthened, or let me use it, put this example in writing. That the Khalifa must be Arab / Quraysh. So first Arab and then Quraysh. Okay, let's say I have this opinion, and let's say the bias now my bias is twofold. One, thinking that this is an Islamic opinion, and secondly, because of some nationalistic feelings in me. I'm a proud Arab, or I think highly of the Arabs, or the Arab supremacy, like white supremacy. Okay, so this becomes a bias that allows me, that can impact my thought. So my thought process, the accuracy of rational thoughts, it depends on the accuracy of the report to the brain of the subject, on the accuracy of the information I'm using, if it's valid or invalid, correct, how strong this information, and how thorough or complete the information is. If the information is thorough and complete, then at least there is one element of inaccuracy is there. So that's the some of the issues with the thought. There is one more issue which is very important to understand, which I will call the confusion between thought and instinct. Now, where does this confusion come from? Let's say I assume that I'm I'm very careful on the rational process of thought. I don't want to be drifted. However, instead of using previous information, I use previously generated and stored responses of my instincts. Okay, so let's say, and in fact, why I say this is confusion, because some people sometimes when they start saying, you know what, some animals have even the ability to think, and they can remember things, and they can adapt, and all the examples they use and the justification is based on the previously stored responses of the animal to the instinct or to the needs, and the ability of that animal to retrieve and recollect those responses, even though could be from many years ago. Sometimes not necessarily years, but days. Like dogs can always recall the response to something that has that threatened their life, and they take actions based on those responses. So here, the humans, because in our life, from the time of birth until now, our brain has been collecting millions and millions of responses to events, to views, to scenes, to voices, to feelings, to touches, to actions, to different people or animals or plants. So all of these things are being stored. And so when you pass a judgment, instead of bringing up an information, which is the information is really a thought, and this thought had been either generated by you and it becomes part of your previous information, or generated by other people and you got it in your brain and this becomes yours. So these are thoughts. And also in the brain, in the storage of the brain, so the brain, I would say, stores information which are one, thoughts generated by me or by others, or it can store responses instinct responses to many issues, can be responses. Now, in the process of thinking, especially when you are passing a quick thought or immediate thought, or you are not being thorough, you may end up using partially this part. If you use this one, this does not qualify your thought to be a rational thinking. So this is an issue that can confuse the rational thinking, not only make it inaccurate, it does make it inaccurate, or because you have not used the proper information on the subject, it can give you a bias, and you are not supposed to your instinct responses to the thought. You can use the instinct response. For example, if you want to, would you like to eat, let's say, French fries? You ate it, you liked it. Sometimes you ate it, you like it. Sometimes you ate it and it gave you some heartburn. So at some point of time, you are offered French fries. You say, no, 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 thank you, because it gives me heartburn. The heartburn feeling overrides the feeling of joy when you are enjoying eating the French fries. And so this is an instinct to the response, which is okay, you can use it, but that's not a thought. Now, if you are thinking, you want to provide a thought, and you use the instinct response, your own instinct response, that's not a thought. That's still a response to the instinct. So these are the main issues here, which allow. So in conclusion, we'll say the rational number one, it applies to all types of thinking. It allows to pass a thought on any issue. Accuracy is as good as the availability of the components of thinking, let's call it. Okay. Must be isolated from the instinct responses. Okay. And then it applies, I said it applies to all types of thinking, which will be the subject of our next class, because the next class I will talk about the types of thinkings, which I already enumerated in one of the previous slides. And the I will just make a quick statement, which will be, which I will talk about in the next class. It will be the only valid method for what we call the Renaissance. Huh? I got it. Of people. So this is very important, because without the rational thinking, you cannot revive, you cannot progress, you cannot become an advanced ummah. Scientific thinking allows you to produce fruits and results of revival and of Renaissance. Logic can allow you to be sophisticated about about some of the fruits of your Renaissance, but you cannot achieve Renaissance without rational thinking. Why? Because we will discuss what Renaissance is, which is really it's the rational thinking about the current life vis-a-vis the life before and the life after. Okay, I will stop right here. and I will make the next lectures will be part of the second course on thinking, which is the forms / types of thinking. Okay. Okay. Now this second course, we have to agree on when do we start that. I will talk to the brothers of the Oasis, or maybe we can agree on that within the group, the thinking group. We can discuss that. Okay. Any questions here? I know some of the brothers or sisters left us because it's too late in your area, especially in Kashmir or Pakistan, or also in Kyrgyzstan. It's very late now. But I will.
I have a question.
Go ahead, brother.
So in the thinking book, it mentions that there are things that cannot sense the reality, nor can it be transferred by the senses, but the effects fall on the sensation. And it gave the example of the plane and how.
Oh, okay. Now that's a good question. Remember, I mentioned earlier that sometimes you, I think, let me show which slide I had it. Yeah, here. The validation process, here when I said the report about the object, there is a validation process, which is a rational thinking. So there is a validation process to see if there is an object or not. And one of the validation process comes the effect. Let's say, effects of an object. Let's say knocking at the door, sound of an airplane, image or shadow, not image, shadow of a human. So I did not see the human, I saw the shadow. So now I have to pass a judgment on the human. Whose shadow is this? I see a shadow, so someone might be approaching me. I hear a knocking at the door, so I assume there is someone behind the door. Now, here, what you really are doing, you are doing first rational thinking. First rational thinking is to associate the effect with the cause. So it's not automatic. It's not something goes by. So there is a process, same process. So in this case, when I hear a knock at the door, I hear the sound. The sound is on the door. It is a sound of a knock. And then my previous information tells me that this type of knock is a knock by a grown-up human, because the sound I got it from the top of the door, not from the lower bottom, so it must be a grown-up person. The knock is not very heavy, it's soft. So soft knocks in my brain are associated with female being there. So now I come to the conclusion, the first conclusion, from my thinking about the knock is that this is a woman knocking at my door. Now, from this time on, so this woman, so it's a woman, I need to pass a judgment who it could be. So I consider all the possible women who could knock at my door. Now note that until now, I made a judgment about the knock itself. And similarly, when I hear the sound of an airplane, I make a judgment on the sound, that this sound is a sound of an airplane. I did not see the plane. There may not be even a plane. Still, it's a sound of a plane. So now, when I conclude that it's a sound of an airplane, and then it's a sound of a real airplane, it's not someone playing some audio outside somewhere. Why? Because of the nature of the sound, the variations in the frequencies that is coming, and the sound traveling away from my ears at a certain speed. So all of these are pieces of information that allows me to pass information or to make a judgment. It's a sound of an airplane flying in the skies above me. Now, I want to rationalize what type of airplane is that. Now, I have previous information on sounds of fighting jets or commercial jets or cargo jets. I have been in the area, I have seen many of them, and then I can conclude that this is, let's say, a fighting jet because of the speed of the sound, because of the sound itself, the noise, how it goes. So I know it's a jet fighter. Third, what type of jet fighter is this? Without seeing the plane, can I pass a judgment? Of course. If I have enough information, I have heard the noise coming from, or the sound coming from an F-14. I hear the sound coming from a MiG, Soviet-made MiG, or from a Mirage, the French airplane. Then I can make a conclusion. This must be a Phantom 14, F-14 airplane. Actually, this example, I remember when in our early days when we were growing, there were lots of jet fighters in our skies going between Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and even the Jewish state. And with the watching the planes, first we watched them, and we started distinguishing between different types of planes. Now, if we are sitting at home and we hear a sound of a plane, then we immediately realize this is a sound of a plane that is used by the Israelis. And therefore we run to the shelter. Or we find that we figure out, no, this is the sound of a plane that is used by Jordanian Air Force. So we go up to the top or to the roof of our buildings in order to watch, instead of going down to the shelter. So you can, the idea here is, number one, to have the sound, you have to use rational thought to distinguish the sound itself. Then you can use rational thinking to distinguish the plane or the airplane brand or direction, or even the risk factor. as I mentioned. So all of these comes as, so you have multiple rational thinking, not only one.
So in the book, it says that regarding the effects that fall under the sensation, that thinking will take place in the existence, but not in the nature.
Oh, it
So-
depends. No, it depends. As I said, if the voice or the sound, now that's the first rational thought, you came to the conclusion it is an airplane. Now, if you have if you have previous information on different sounds, so you can distinguish this is a sound of a jet fighter, so you know it's a jet fighter. Now, the nature of that jet fighter, like what color it has, what size it has, who is in it, that you need more information on this issue and more sensing on this, because if that cannot be sensed, there is no way. And there is here the only sensing you have is the sound of an object. So you know an object exists, but what that object? See, the existence of an airplane, that is that's a judgment. Now, the sound is a characteristic of an airplane, but airplanes have different sounds. So if you can distinguish between sounds and you have enough information, you use that information to pass a judgment.
So we can use the nature of it, that if it's a fighter jet, if it's a cargo jet, or if it's a commercial plane, so we can also determine the nature of the plane in that sense.
Yeah, you can. If you have enough information, previous information on these, you can, as I said also, let's say, if I have previous information that 10 minutes ago, I heard information from BBC News that an airstrike had been launched from, let's say, the Israelis or Jewish state Air Force base directed at the northern part of Jordan. But then after 10 minutes, I hear an airplane sound. The airplane sound, from my knowledge and information, it is an airplane that it's a jet fighter. And this is a sound very peculiar to the F-14 jet fighters. And I have the ability to distinguish between F-14 and F-16 sounds. And also, if I have a measure of the like instruments, because here I can use instruments. This is not scientific, but it's to be able to tell the speed at which the sound is traveling, and I can measure that by a small device that measures the pitch of the sound. So the pitch of the sound becomes higher and stronger when the plane comes closer. So I should be able to measure even the speed. So I knew what speed is this. I know the speed of the jet fighter, which is F-14. And my previous information is that there is a strike. So my conclusion, my thought would be, I correlate this information. So this must be part of that airstrike. So I better go to the shelter right now. So that is rational thinking. Now, it could be wrong, because I said rational thinking can be mistaken, because the previous thought I had about the strike probably had stopped, or they changed the plan. It's only just jet fighter coming for surveillance, not for the strike. So all of these are rational thoughts. I'm using rational. I'm not using logic, and I'm not using scientific. It is rational thinking, but the conclusion may not be deterministic, may not be final.
So when we're talking about the effects of the sensation, this is the same way we come to the existence of Allah, which is through the effects, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. The existence of Allah is through the effect. Now, because we don't have previous information about Allah or about God, the Creator, we have no previous information about God. We don't know Him. So the only thing we can conclude is that there exists a creator, someone who is able to create. Note that able to create is a judgment, is capability of, now also capability of creating with unlimited power, because it's creating from nothing, from zero, bringing something into existence without having previous existence. That is, so I have now a thought about the entity and its capability. And also, I have another conclusion about this entity that I call the creator, that it's eternal, does not have a beginning. This is rational. That's not, it's not narration, it's not a report. See, so there are things about some of the characteristics of the object that exists, which I saw its effect, vis-a-vis the composition. What is it composed of? Unless I have previous information. Like for the airplanes, I do have information. So if I was able to conclude that it's F-14, then I also can conclude it is made of a special alloy of aluminum and silver, because that's what F-14 is made of, and I have this information previously. And then I will say, well, if this jet fighter falls or collapses or being shot down, I will be able to go and look for its remainder, because it's very expensive material. I can make actions based on that. Now, note that I have previous information. It's not a completely unknown object. Like the issue of knocking at the door. I can come to the conclusion that the one who is knocking at the door is a boy, or is a boy or girl, not grown up, not higher than 1.5 meters height, based on where the knock is coming from.
So the previous information helps us with the nature of it. With Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't have the previous information,
Yes.
so we cannot judge the nature of it, but we can sense the existence of it.
We can sense the existence, and we can sense some of the characteristics which are related to the effect that we are seeing.
See, okay.
So the effect is of creation. So this entity is a creator, and the creator in this case, I have seen that it's not part of the creatures, and it does have the ability to create from zero. So that power, or that ability, is unlimited, does not have limits. Then I use my previous information that anything that's limited in one feature, it's limited in all features. If it's unlimited in one feature, it's unlimited in all features. Therefore, he is unlimited or eternal. So I can make that conclusion about the eternality of the creator. And that's when we talk about we apply this rational thinking on the existence. Those are the key issues we will be looking at. But you have to remember that the effect itself, recognizing the effect, understanding the effect, and concluding what this effect is, complete characterization and understanding of this effect, like the knock at the door. What is this knock? The sound of an airplane. What is this sound? If I have enough information to conclude it's a sound of a jet fighter, or it's a sound of a cargo plane, or it's a sound of commercial plane, it's a plane that's traveling at very high distance from me, or it's at a lower distance, or it's an object that's flying at a very fast speed or a very relatively slow speed, or this is a helicopter or a different plane. All of this I can make the conclusions, because I can conclude my understanding of the effect itself, and I can correlate now the effect to the object using my previous information. Okay.
I have one last question, and
Yeah,
this
go
is
ahead.
related to yesterday we discussed that psychology, it's not a scientific method. Would psychology be a rational method?
It can be rational, and it can be logic. It depends on how you approach it. Let's say if you want to make a conclusion or a thought about me being a suicidal case, a case that can commit suicide, because that's psychology. You're talking about my psychology, because now how could this be logic? Logic, if you simply compare me, you have two cases that you have seen in your life with similar symptoms like mine. When you say, this symptom is similar to the symptom I have seen with this brother or the sister, and therefore you are suicidal. Those brothers, the two ones I knew, they did commit suicide in 1 year after they were discovered with this disease or this illness or this psychology. So you may commit a suicide in 1 year unless you are treated. That's here you are using logic. But if you have information about certain type of behavior, or maybe words actually, that come from me, probably you have to investigate me based on what I say, my talk. So you allow me to speak, to talk, you record my messages, you look at my tweets, you look at my Facebook post, you look at my writings, you look at my letters which I write to my friends or to my superiors or to my enemies, and you have the ability to correlate certain words or phrases with certain behavior, and that's a correlation which you are doing. Now it could be correct, could be incorrect, as I said, but that's a rational thinking. So you are using rational thinking, but in this case, rational thinking, the inaccuracy of it is very large, unless you have very abundant information and you are able to sort all of them and make valid conclusions. But you have to be careful not to rely on statistical measures. Once you start doing the statistical measures, you are doing the logic now. You are switching from rational to logic. Statistics is the father of logic. It's not necessarily wrong, it's logic. Okay, but that's so when you talk about psychology and sociology and socioeconomic impacts and surveys, there is a mixture between rational and logic here.
So in the book Thinking, it says that it's an observation of an original condition and factors plus subjective conditions and factor.
Right. It's an observation, and this observation means you observe the. Go ahead.
Yes. No, so it's observation on the original conditions and factors and the subjective conditions and factor. So the subjective conditions and factor, can it be a mix of rational and scientific?
Oh yes. Except that in the psychology, the subjective conditions those are not real, because you cannot subject the object, in this case the human, to certain conditions which are not which are abnormal conditions to see how he behaves in them. That's it's almost impossible. So it's not a mixture of science and logic, it's a mixture of logic and rationale. There is no scientific, there is no subjugating of the entity to an environment which is different than the normal original environment in which he or she lives in.
But I mean, sometimes they do experiments on humans that go beyond the threshold of humans. I mean, they've done it for within the psychological warfare and all that, just to determine that it kind of breaks the human. They lose their mind, they die or something within those experimentations. So wouldn't that be considered outside the boundaries of the normal of the human?
No, I think this is not outside. It's just extending the range of the conditions. Let's say I'm a human who lives within, let's say, a small house, decent food. You can put me in a much smaller house and more scarce food, or you can take me to a cell like in a prison with almost no food for a week. So all these are extending my regular conditions, just extending them to a different scope. But if you put me in a condition where I live in a total environment which is absolutely the humans don't live in, let's say, keep me as a human under different pressure than the pressure in this world, like the people, they take them to Mars or outside the space and see how their conditions, their physical conditions change. That is science. That is science. Because I put you to live for, let's say, a week or a few days on the moon with the conditions of the moon, not in the space capsule. If you are in the space capsule, you are still on the moon, but within the Earth conditions. But if you put me in conditions which are not meant for humans to live in, now I cannot think of something that you can do it without really killing the person.
So just last example, there is a book by Naomi Campbell, Shock and Awe, and it's a thesis of different things, and she mentions how McGill and in the 60s and 70s CIA, they did different experimentations and how they applied that to the Iraq, where the same philosophy was used with the awe and shock to break the society and to colonize it and all that. So I mean, this is not scientific, then this is rational, where they're using previous information, what they gathered with the experimentation, and they applied it in Iraq, and that's how they kind of subjugated the society. So that's what we'll say. It's not scientific what they did.
No, it's not scientific.
But it's more
it is rational. And it's partially logic, because they probably compared it with some experiments on some rats or animals, and then they applied it there, and they thought it does apply, and it does, because as I said, logic is not necessarily incorrect. And then they subjugate them to certain conditions so they can break their zeal, or they change their behavior altogether.
Okay. Jazakallah khair.
Okay. Any other questions from the Abu Yusuf or Rahiq? Okay.
Abu Talha, just last thing, for the next course, are you going to announce it through this chat group?
Yeah, I will announce it through this chat thinking group, and I will see who's going to. I will give 1 or 2 days for those who will commit. Anyone who will commit to the next course must go through the material of the first course and complete all the videos and the questions that I've put there.
In that case, maybe if you could give us some time,
Yes, I
because
will.
I've been attending the course every day. I mean, sorry, on weekly basis. I haven't been listening to it, but so I haven't. So if you could give me some time to kind of finish that, so in order I want to enroll.
Yeah, I will do that for everybody. Yes, I will give some good time to go through that, because I want to make sure that at least the people, especially those who did not attend the lectures regularly, if they want to continue with the class, they have to go through the videos and answer the questions. Questions are simple. I just want to make sure they are there to make sure that someone has gone through the material.
Inshallah, yes. And if you could just keep us in this, because with OSS initially I had their mail was going to my junk folder, so I missed few beginning classes. So I just want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So if you could just any updates within this chat group, so I don't miss it. Inshallah.
Yeah, I will, inshallah. But you do have access to the site, correct?
Yes, I have access to the site. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I listened to 2 lectures, but I haven't continued because I've been attending, so I didn't listen to after that. So, but inshallah, I'll do it.
Inshallah, jazakallah khair.
Yeah.
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.